There it is. Proceeded. And there it is, Houston. There's Camelot. Wide on target. I see it. We got them all. 42 degrees, 37 degrees, through 5,500. 53 degrees.
After Apollo 17 left the moon in 1972, it took over 50 years for an American spacecraft to go back. In our last episode, we discussed how in 2019 and 2023, China and India broke that silence with their own Chang'e 4 and Chandrayaan 3. But finally, after 50 years, in November of 2022, the US Artemis I launched with no crew on board, breaking the American silence. The rocket they used, the Space Launch System, was built with modified space shuttle parts and technology. It used the same RS-25 engines that flew the space shuttle for decades, plus some solid rocket boosters from Northrop Grumman, which are direct descendants of the shuttle boosters. This is NASA's own rocket, government-owned and government-contracted. It's not a private company product. And this is important because in future episodes, we're going to be talking about the integration of companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Intuitive Machines, Firefly Aerospace, and Astrobotics into the NASA ecosystem. Even Amazon gets a seat at the table for some reason. More on that towards the end, so make sure you stick around for that. Even though Artemis I did not have any humans on board, it did have a crew capsule called Orion to test. So it was a full dress rehearsal for what was to come next with Artemis II. Test your brand new rocket and your brand new capsule with no humans inside first. But in the driver's seat of the capsule, they put Commander Moonkin Campos, rigged with sensors to measure vibration, acceleration, and radiation exposure, standing in for what a real astronaut would experience. They also had two additional mannequin torsos on board, Helga and Zohar. One wore a vest to protect from radiation, and the other didn't, to measure radiation exposure across the body and how much the capsule was protecting them. This was a moon flyby, but it was also a safety test for the future, drawing off the Apollo playbook of repeating for safety. Orion is the spacecraft designed to carry and sustain the crew on Artemis missions to the moon and return them safely to the Earth. As we mentioned earlier, it's launched on NASA's heavy lift rocket, the SLS. For the first time ever in NASA history, Orion's service module was built entirely by the European Space Agency. The service module is the powerhouse that fuels and propels the Orion spacecraft in space. It's located just below the crew module, and it provides critical functions like propulsion, thermal control, and electrical power generated by solar arrays. It can also provide life support systems, including water, oxygen, and nitrogen to the crew. As well as functioning as the main propulsion system, it's also responsible for orbital maneuvering and position control. The third and final part of the Orion multi-purpose crewed vehicle is the launch abort system. This is the emergency system that can jettison the crew module from the SLS rocket. So that's all three parts of the Orion multi-purpose crewed vehicle. But back to the actual mission. On November 16th, 2022, Artemis I flew to a distant retrograde orbit around the moon, meaning that it looped around in the opposite direction the moon orbits Earth. Take a look at this to get a better idea. And at its furthest, Orion got about 268,000 miles from Earth, a record still held today for the longest distance traveled by a spacecraft built for humans, even beating Apollo 13's record. The entire mission was way longer than Artemis II. It lasted 25 days, 10 hours, and 53 minutes. They had the Orion capsule orbiting the moon for a full 6 days. With no astronauts on board to feed, they wanted to stress test the systems in deep space as long as possible before ever having to risk a crew. On December 11th, 2022, Orion splashed back down in Baja California near Guadalupe Island in the Pacific. The re-entry speed hit about 24,500 miles per hour, Mach 32. Using a skip re-entry, Orion dipped into the upper atmosphere, skipped back out like a stone, and dropped back down again for its final descent under parachutes. This skip technique allows the craft to slow down regardless of angle, and it helps with a safe landing. Although Artemis I was uncrewed, NASA wouldn't just launch a ship without making the absolute best use of it. So, along the way, NASA dropped 10 small CubeSats that deployed from the rocket's upper stage. One of them, the NeoScout, was meant to fly by a small asteroid using an 86 square meter solar sail, but NASA was never able to establish communications with it and lost it. But another really cool one was called BioSentinel, and this carried live yeast cells into deep space to study how deep space radiation affected living organisms, carrying life further from Earth than any experiment in history. And when we get to Artemis II, we'll talk about the difference between this mission and the Avatar mission on board Artemis II. And since I promised you Amazon, because apparently even the future of space exploration needs a corporate sponsor, they also tested Callisto, a tech demo built with Amazon and Cisco. They were examining voice assistant and video conferencing tech, proving that you won't be able to leave Earth to escape Zoom meetings anymore. Scary. But the number one priority objective was testing the heat shield. After all, this was what protected Artemis II astronauts during re-entry. It survived, but it lost charred material in a different way than predicted, which ended up changing the timeline of Artemis II. But as we all know now, that heat shield ended up working great for the Artemis II crew, returning them safely to Earth. So, while Artemis I didn't carry a crew, it did several pivotal things. It set a distance record for spacecraft designed for a crew. It tested the SLS launch system and Orion spacecraft, ensuring astronauts would not be exposed to deadly levels of radiation or experience a catastrophe. They stress tested the systems for far longer than Artemis II would fly, just to be extra sure. And just for fun, they hitched a few satellites along for the ride and tested video communications and Alexa-style voice assistant technology in outer space. This mission may not have made headlines like Artemis II did, and future missions likely will, but it laid the groundwork for the future of manned space exploration, Moonbase Alpha, and beyond to Mars. I hope everyone learned a lot today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Make sure to come back soon.